So, hello
Yeah.
everyone. We're here for yet another podcast. And what are we talking about today, Joel?
Hello, everyone. Today we're talking about world peace. How can we achieve world peace?
Oh yeah, so Joel was listening to this other podcast and she heard somebody say that. Well, what did you hear?
So it was Duncan Trussell being interviewed by Joe Rogan, and he said that he was at Burning Man when somebody asked him, "Hey, do you think? How do you think we can get achieve world peace?" Or
Oh yeah,
what was the
there you
question?
go. I think that was the question, yeah?
Do you think we'll ever achieve world peace?
Yeah, and then it's an interesting question because the instinct is always to say yes, right? Like we will achieve world peace. So,
Seriously?
well, or maybe not. It doesn't matter. But most people who answer that question, they answer it without really examining the situation there, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, you can think about it. I mean, there's always that really old Twilight Zone episode. Remember where the guy wishes that there could be world peace, and the genie or whoever was granting wishes just kills everybody on the planet Earth, and then it's like, there you go, world peace.
Oh
There's
my
no more
gosh.
people.
Oh my gosh, I'm not familiar at all with that episode of Twilight Zone or whatever.
Yeah, I don't even remember what it was called, but uh, so as a result, you can achieve world peace through basically two ways. One way is eliminating people, and another way is making people live harmoniously with each other, right? Now,
So let's scratch out the eliminating all people
yeah, okay,
option.
so I don't know why we're so easily scratching out that option, but it seems like a reasonable option, but no.
Let's assume most people want to live.
Okay, so we're gonna make that assumption. So instead, we need to be able to bring world peace to people um, through essentially equality, I would say. Not necessarily equality. You know how like nowadays it's very popular. People talk about like equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity, blah blah blah. But those are all nice when you're talking about within each country. So within the United States, what do we need to do to achieve equality? Within China or India or whatever, what do we need to do to achieve equality? Those are within the country, right? But then, what do we need to achieve equality country to country? Like, how do we make Americans and Chinese, for instance, let's just take those two countries because we have basically two superpowers. You have the American superpower and you have the Chinese superpower, and let's throw Russia into the mix, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we make it so that the people in those countries, Russia and China, for instance, have the same quality of life as Americans? Or a better question is it possible, given the current state of technology, for people in, no, Russia probably, but like China, to have the same quality of life and the same standard of living as in the United States?
Well, why in the United States? I don't understand. Why is, the quality of living in the United States better than everywhere else?
Well, it's not necessarily better, because you can compare different, right? Like we were learning about Finland and how Finland claims to be the best country in the world because they have the highest quality of living, the blah blah blah, the least crime, the most education, etc., 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 right?
Mm-hmm. We were talking really about Denmark, but Finland came into the mix too.
Yeah, Finland apparently has like the lowest crime in the world or something like that. But for a large-ish country. Um,
But please don't quote us on that.
Yeah, well, that's what the Finnish people claim. We don't know whether or not they're
So
lying.
the Finnish people trust their police forces.
Yeah. Um, but the reason why we're not taking them as an example is because Finnish people in general, not as a whole, but in general, are relatively low in terms of how much they consume in terms of resources, right?
Mm-hmm.
They consume a lot of energy because they need to heat themselves. But other than that, they're kind of conservative people. They don't buy a lot of cars, they don't buy a lot of gadgets. They're not particularly like, spendy
I
people.
think that could be said about most Europeans. Excepting the British. The British are all into Amazon and whatnot.
I'm sure that it's like that probably everywhere else, but in any case, but if you look at something like America or Great Britain or even Germany or France, if you look at those countries, the amount of energy that those people spend per year is staggering. And I mean, I believe the statistics are that in Germany it's somewhere around um, we should look it up. Can you
Yeah.
actually just look it up really quickly? How much does the German household spend in electricity in megawatts?
Or kilowatts.
It's in megawatts
Oh.
because it's per year. So per year. So electrical consumption Germany per year. And I believe it's 5 megawatts per year. And then I believe the same statistic for United States is 10 megawatts per year. Now, there is a reason for that, and we can dive into it really quickly, but
It says, at least what Google is giving me. In the chart below, we see that German households consume some 130 terawatt hours of electricity annually.
mhm.
Divide that by 41 million households, and you get 3,171 kilowatt hours.
Yeah, so that's 3 megawatts, megawatt hours. So they consume about 3 megawatt hours per year, and then American households, I believe that number is much closer to 10. If you,
Seriously?
yeah, much closer to 10. And it's exactly the same thing with water consumption, and it's exactly the same thing with food consumption and the amount of food that we throw out.
I'm looking it up. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm on my phone, so it's kind of slow. In 2018, the average annual electricity consumption for a U.S. residential utility customer was 10,972 kilowatt hours.
10 kilowatts, yeah. Or actually, 11 kilowatts. I'm sorry, megawatts based on that.
Yeah.
1,000 kilowatts is 1 megawatt.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
Do we live in more severe climate? Do we live in worse climate area
Than Germany?
than Germany?
So we don't. What we live in is a climate that's more prone to hot weather. In Germany, it doesn't get super, super, super hot. It gets kind of hot, but they're not.
It's very mild.
It's mild, and they aren't particularly used to air conditioning. And what we dump most of our electricity into is actually primarily heating and air conditioning. And of course, electric heating is not particularly efficient, but electric air conditioning is, well, that's the best that you can do basically at the moment. Something to remember, though, that this is not an entirely fair comparison, because if you look at Germany, they spend much more on heating than we do.
I'm looking at New Zealand, you know, just for comparison to have like a third party.
Yeah, well, and New Zealand would also be very air conditioner heavy.
Yeah, they used 9,000 kilowatt hours in 2014.
Yeah, it's probably about the same right now. But it's not like people's.
So here's the thing I'm thinking. Like, geographically, Germany is what, about the size of California?
No, Germany is a bigger country than that.
Size of Texas?
That sounds about right.
They have.
Well, actually, I'm not even sure. Is
They have-
Texas bigger than California?
I think Texas is bigger than California.
California is quite long, though. And you have to remember what we mostly think of California is the area between San Diego and San Francisco, but that's like only 2/3 of California. There's an entire third past San Francisco.
So how large is Germany? Germany is 130. Area is almost 138,000 square miles.
Okay,
Let's compare that to California and Texas, just for.
so California is square miles. And we're gonna see how much California. Well, but why does it matter? Because we're looking at it.
Well, there's less regional change, like climate geographically. There's less change, and so, you know, in the United States we have serious geographical changes from the East Coast to the West Coast.
Oh yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
the
Okay.
electrical consumption would vary dramatically.
Not necessarily. I don't think so.
So the area of California is 163,700 square
And
miles.
what was
138,000.
and what was Texas?
Oh, Texas. I missed
I
Texas.
think there was a Texas one right below it. Okay. So now we're gonna see what I think. I think California must be bigger than Texas. Nope, I
268,597
was wrong. Texas is big.
square
Yeah.
miles.
Yeah. So that means Germany is actually. I was wrong. It's actually pretty small by comparison to Texas or California.
Yep. And I
Very
bet
interesting.
you, like, France is even smaller than Germany.
And-
Is that true?
No, they're about comparable. At least on the map. But you know, those maps are all, what do they call them? Um,
Not very accurate because of the fisheye effect.
well, yeah, but there's a special term for it. So when you guys look at a map, what you're looking at is a flattened out version of a spherical Earth. And if you're looking at a map that's, very close by, where you're only looking at, a small geographical area, then things, pretty much up to scale. But when you're looking at a global map, and you see, Iceland being enormous in size, and then America being all squished down and stuff like that, and then Europe being kind of squished down, and then Africa being enormous and stuff, that's because of the whole idea that you have to take essentially a spherical surface and flatten it onto a map. And things in the middle of the map kind of shrink, while things at the edges of the map blow up, kind of like on a GoPro camera, where when you're shooting, sometimes you can see distortions.
You're right. We once had a guy come into our school when I was in high school explaining to us that, flat maps don't make any sense because the world is not flat. The
Oh yeah,
world is a globe, a sphere, and you cannot.
there's a large group of people online who would disagree with you that last sentence, however.
Okay, so let's assume the world is a 3D,
Is not flat
is not flat and it's a 3D sphere.
and does not have an ice wall at the edge of it.
Yes. So let's move on. So I did other Google searches, and France is 248,573 square miles, and their average household consumption, which is still not true, like, I think comparable to America anyways, is 5,000 kilowatts.
Yeah.
Kilowatt hours.
Yeah, so 5 megawatts for them, 3 for Germany. Again, I think Germany uses the least because they straight out don't have air conditioning in Germany. In France, they have some air conditioning, but not a lot. In the UK, they have more air conditioning, and I think you see that with like more and more air conditioning that you have, the more consumption of power that you produce, right? But check that out. Check out that same consumption in China. Type in China electrical consumption or India electrical consumption because before
Are we going to look at numbers? Are we expecting super low numbers?
they're going to be very low.
Like under a kilowatt?
Well, no, it can't be under a kilowatt. Under a megawatt. So that's China?
Yeah.
How much is China?
It says 3,927,000
Per-
kilowatt hours
Per capita?
per capita, yeah.
I wonder how accurate that is.
Maybe they're distributing it like across
Well,
the
no,
country.
the reason I'm saying I wonder how accurate that is more so based on how are they calculating it? Are they taking all the people who live in China and dividing them by the total consumption of the electricity in China? The reason why that may not be, so look up India instead, because they have a lot of heavy industry in China.
So this is kind of an outdated thing, and it's 804.1 kilowatt hours.
So 0.8 megawatts.
And it says 2014 next to it.
2014 is good enough because, again, people's habits haven't changed that much, even though their standard of living has increased. So maybe now they're up to a megawatt or so.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But what you're looking at there, right, is you're looking at people becoming wealthier. And as they become wealthier, they want to consume as many resources as people in America consume, right? But if everybody all of a sudden, let's say the entirety of the world, was to consume as much electricity as an average American does, that would mean that India, for instance, needs to increase their consumption of electricity tenfold. Or rather, they need to increase their production of electricity tenfold.
So here in Wikipedia,
Mm-hmm.
you're right. That's like one of life's greatest luxuries. Being able to afford air conditioning, heating, all like a whole bunch of electrical appliances, right?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. When we are talking about equality in the world, we have to start at a country level, right? So, for instance, how do you achieve world peace when you have one country, one side of borders, and one piece of land, and people there consume 1/10 as many resources as people in another country with another border and another set of resources and restrictions. So obviously the people in the country that consume the least amount of resources would be kind of jealous, and there would be no world peace. There would be continuous struggle for um, dominance, because whoever achieves dominance will be able to provide to their people the luxury of um, electricity and water and all this other stuff, right?
So here we have a very fascinating page. You can read it to us. Um, it lists energy consumption by country and then per capita. And the leader is China. China is using an insane amount of electricity.
China is using an insane amount of electricity.
But when you divide it by per capita, this is you lower it down to what, 2006.
Well, this is 4 megawatts, 4.5 megawatts
per person
per
year.
person versus 12 megawatts per person. So basically, America consumes 3 times as much electricity. An American consumes 3 times as much electricity as average Chinese, right? The problem with this calculation is that you're looking here at a total. So China totally, I don't want to count all the zeros, God damn it. So it's 6 with 1, 2, 3, 4 with 12 zeros after it. Whatever that in watts is, I don't feel like figuring it out. Terawatts, gigawatts, whatever. In any case, well, let's see. It's mega, giga, I don't know. Whatever. 6 plus 12 zeros. Watts. That's what China consumes, and America consumes roughly 4 plus 12 zeros.
Right.
But you have to keep in mind, China produces almost all of our aluminum. Aluminum consumes tremendous amounts of electricity. China produces almost all of our steel.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think they heat steel furnaces nowadays? With electricity?
I
mean, not all of them, but many of them. And for industrial use. I mean, there was a reason why all of those asshole Bitcoin miners were doing it in China, because electricity there is literally dirt cheap. And the reason it's dirt cheap is because the government subsidizes the construction of all of these nuclear power plants, and also coal and solar and gas power. They have every kind of power plant imaginable, and of course hydroelectric power plants, and then they sell that electricity relatively inexpensively to industry in order to make shit.
So
right?
They're quite economical, it looks like. If America consumes 4,000 gigawatts
Yeah, America consumes four whatever's,
or
let's call it super watts.
Okay.
America consumes 4 super watts, and China consumes
6.3 super watts.
Yeah, but China makes like most of the shit that's consumed in the world, and America barely makes anything nowadays, which is a crying shame and a sadness all in itself.
So what are we really spending all that energy on?
Comfort, large screen televisions, and air conditioning.
So people
Yeah, people just spend it on large screen televisions, on air conditioning, and on lighting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I thought the LED revolution would make people consume less electricity.
It would. Oh, wow, look at that. Canada consumes even more. But in Canada, the reason why, so that's a little bit, again, misleading statistic, because in Canada they do a lot of their heating using electricity and nuclear power, I believe. Don't quote me on that last bit. But they do use a lot of electricity to heat themselves. So this is why you see that they consume 4 megawatts, or 5, or almost 15, I'm sorry, megawatts per year. Let's see who else is consuming a lot. Taiwan, that's understandable because they also manufacture a lot.
I was gonna say, oh, because they have that very tropical weather and they have to cool
Oh,
themselves down.
wow, Norway. Norway consumes 24 megawatts per year. But
Maybe it's industry?
no, no, again, Norway is a cold country. And same thing, Sweden, 12 megawatts. But in those countries, in those Nordic countries, they almost entirely heat with electricity. They have those baseboards around the bottoms of their houses,
Mm-hmm.
and you just turn them on, and they also have heated floors, and that's how they heat their houses. I mean, obviously not universally, but you get the point. So as a result, that drives their electrical
And
use
that's
quite.
why Teslas are very popular in Norway.
Yeah, because electricity is what they are shooting for there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you see United Arab Emirates, 16 megawatts per year. Again, that's because it's very, very hot there. Here's our friend Finland with 14. So again, they use a lot of electricity. But then we get some countries like Bangladesh, right? Now, Bangladesh has, let's see, one, two, three. So they have 55 million people in Bangladesh, right? And those 55 million people are living on. I mean, that's not even.
I don't think that's 55 million. I thought that was the power consumption of that country.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's even worse. I'm sorry. Forget it.
Bangladesh has a whole bunch, like,
One,
really,
157 million people.
yeah,
That's half of United States, right?
right, yeah.
And they consume 351.
0.3
So that's not even. Yeah, that's like
megawatts.
0.3 of a megawatt.
Yeah.
So 0.3 versus 12. Now imagine if, and it's very hot in Bangladesh, right?
Yeah.
So imagine if those people were all of a sudden to become rich enough to be able to afford all kinds of
Comforts and
comforts.
luxuries.
I mean, let's compare these two
First world
countries.
luxuries like
Yeah,
air
first of all,
conditioning.
let's just compare these two countries. So Bangladesh and Switzerland and Kuwait, all three of these countries consume largely the same amount of electricity, but Switzerland has 8 million people in it. Kuwait has 2 million people in it, and Bangladesh has 157 fucking million people in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the efficiencies, you can see how you can see how these people, if they were all of a sudden to become rich enough to afford a bunch of electricity, where's that electricity going to come from? We're already barely struggling to supply enough electricity to light up all the circuits for ourselves, right? And where is Bangladesh going to get that electricity? Well, they're going to burn coal. That's the cheapest way.
Mm-hmm.
You burn coal, that's the cheapest way. That pollutes the environment. What's next, right? So what I'm trying to
Global
say,
warming.
yeah, and then that's what I'm trying to say is, generally speaking, if you want world peace, you will have to drag some of these countries up. But as you drag some of these countries up, you may need to realize that you might need to push some of your own standard of living down. Because Americans consuming 12 megawatts or the Norwegians consuming, well, again, this is why it's a little bit misleading, because we see here countries like Norway consuming quite a bit of power. We see here countries like, let's see, where did we have some really large consumers, like Canada, for instance. Canada has like 16 megawatts, right? Yeah, 14. Oh, 15, right? But they're mostly exclusively heated by electricity. So their water tanks are electric, their baseboards are electric, the heaters in their houses are electric, right? You contrast that to the United States, where most of the parts of the United States that do get cold, Chicago, the Midwest, New York, they all use either propane, natural gas, or heating oil to heat their houses. Very, very few houses in the United States, except in certain except in certain states like Texas, for instance, use electricity for heating as the primary source.
Mm.
And the reason for that is because, well, it's not as efficient as just burning natural gas directly.
Well, I guess you use what you have. Maybe those countries like the Scandinavian countries don't have any natural gas, then they have to
They
buy
do.
the.
They just sell it, and
Oh, I see.
or they use it to. I don't know exactly how that power grid is set up, but they're using, I'm sure, some of that natural gas to produce electricity for their power grid.
What about the Canadians? Why aren't the Canadians heating with natural gas?
Well, maybe again, they're producing electricity with natural gas and then they're distributing it. Because remember they had that whole push, the modern push where it's considered to be more modern to be entirely electric. It's easier to build, it's easier to insure, all this stuff.
Gotcha. Just like Westinghouse dreamt of the fully electric house
Yeah, it's
in the
just
50s.
much easier, and if it costs more, so be it.
So
Right.
the future has arrived in those countries. It just never got to America
Well,
fully.
it has gotten to America as well. We do a lot of things with electricity. We just don't necessarily heat our houses with electricity
Mm-hmm.
because that's maybe not as efficient. Some of those countries are also quite a bit spread out, and if you're quite a bit spread out, it's easier to transfer electricity than it is to, for instance, move around natural gas,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because for the electricity, you just need a wire. For natural gas, you need a pipeline and all kinds of
Right.
environmental concerns and so on and so forth.
So besides bringing people's standard of living up for probably what 75% of the habitated world.
And pushing the standard of living down for the other 25, because the simple situation is, if you really, really do want world peace, it's kind of practically impossible to lift up all the people to the same level that we enjoy here in the United States or in Europe, because we would just run out of resources. People always like to say like, oh, well, the earth can sustain, 7 billion, 8 billion, 10 billion, 12 billion people. Some people argue like, oh, the earth can sustain up to 15 billion people, right? Yes, but not in the lifestyle that we are accustomed to here in the United States. And if you actually get everybody in the world, even today with our 8 billion-ish people or so, to be living the same lifestyle as the rest, as America, or again, Finland, um, the infrastructure of the world will crumble. We won't have enough food. We won't have enough electricity. We won't have enough energy in terms of like gasoline and stuff. We won't have enough products.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. I was thinking about equality when I was thinking about world peace. And I was thinking about it simplistically, like you give everyone the same amount of money when they're born. Let's say you give them 1,000 units of something, of some kind of currency, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you see what they do with it, as if we were playing a Monopoly board game.
But it's just like what Ray Dalio always says. You have to think about the value of money. What does money really mean um, to you? I mean, it's just currency,
You're
right?
right. You're right. It's just currency, but you're saying, well, we now need to supply them with basic lifestyle necessities
Yeah, like
like
think about it this way.
housing and heating and cooling and
Exactly.
food access.
Exactly. So like imagine if you will, like 10 people, and each one of those 10 people, it has been given $1 million, right? At their birth or whatever. And
And
now,
they live on this world, like this earth, and
yeah, and
this.
they live and
Okay.
they're now trapped on an island, and there's only one bottle of water on that island, right? How much does that bottle of water cost? Well, it costs $1 million.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, right? You can't just make everybody rich by just giving them money. That just doesn't work. That just makes things more expensive. It's just shuffling, or all it is just mathematical trick, nothing more. You're just
Right.
shuffling, money around, but if you're not producing the extra products, this is the thing that they realized after the fall of in 1929, after the Great Fall and then the Depression that followed.
Mm-hmm.
What they realized, and this is when we introduced the GDP, people have realized that uh, just the money, just the dollar signs
Mm-hmm.
on these stocks, they don't really do much for the economy, right? So when the economy was booming in the booming 20s, right, or whatever they're called,
Roaring 20s.
roaring 20s, and the
Yeah.
economy was roaring, it was booming, and everybody was building shit, right? But what they didn't realize is that very little actual production was happening. What was happening is a lot of parties and a lot of grand ideas and a lot of investment and a lot of dollar signs trading hands and these stocks just climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing, kind of like what's happening right now for somewhat same, somewhat different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But what was not happening is actual productive output of the country increasing. So after 1929, after that, they instituted in America GDP, gross domestic product, and that's where they take a bunch of output from the companies, like the total output of the country, and then they calculate how much useful products were produced in the country and used by the individuals, by the people in the country,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that gives you a better idea of the economy. And what that implies is it's not really about the money, it's about the access to products, right? So it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter if you have $1 million if you can't buy water, right?
Yes.
You would rather buy water than have $1 million,
Yeah.
given those two and only two choices, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in order to bring world peace, we need to figure out some kind of way to make everybody be kind of on an equal footing. And I think that requires fundamental shifts in technology.
So what you're saying is that we need cheap electricity.
We need cheap electricity, cheap energy, generally cheap
Yeah.
energy, like whatever that energy
And we
comes
need
from.
cheap food and cheap shelter and cheap clothes.
So, food, shelter, and clothes. Let's look at those, right? You need shelter of some kind. Inexpensive shelter, yes. Food, yes. Clothes. I mean, you need all three of those
So
things,
you
but
need all those things in order to live comfortably, more or less, as a human being.
I'm thinking, don't you also like would people in China, for instance, be as happy of their lives as Americans if they had clothes and food and
Shelter.
shelter, but maybe they didn't have some of the other creature comforts, like being able to go to a movie or being able to have a car, for instance, right? Like, what about a car? Is a car a necessity?
Not necessarily.
Well, the car is not necessarily
But
a
some kind of
necessity,
transportation
but
is
if you live in a
important.
yeah, but if you live in a country where not by choice, but by necessity, so to speak, um, only 10% of people have a car, and then there's another country in the world where each family has a car and many families have several cars,
Mm-hmm.
that's access to resources. So some human needed to build that car in order for another human to enjoy it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the situation usually is that the kind of person who built the car nowadays very rarely could enjoy the car, could buy the car, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we see this, we saw this in the 1900s with Henry Ford, one who said that he wanted to make the kind of cars that the employees who were making those cars could afford to purchase. And you think to yourself, okay, that's good, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to
But where did
have buyers for your goodies.
yeah, but where did we get to by 2020? That's what, just over 100 years later, and most cars are made by people who can't afford to purchase that same car, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most car in America are made by people who can't afford a brand new version of that car. Most cars are made in Mexico who can't afford sometimes a car at all. Most cars are made in China. Now a lot of cars are made in China, for instance. GM, for instance, makes a lot of their cars in China. We don't know that, but it's true. And a lot of them actually then are shipped back to United States from China. So China is actually a car manufacturer now. I mean, a lot of people just don't know about it because they're not doing it under their own brand. They're doing it as a subcontractor for a lot of the well-established existing brands, right? But that car that's they manufacture, for instance, this Buick in China for GM, right? And that Buick, the person who built that Buick will never be able to afford that Buick. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say never because the progression in China is quite fast. But at the moment, that person would definitely not be able to afford that particular Buick, right? And that raises another question. I actually had this question a couple of days ago, and I've been ruminating about it. And I was thinking, if you have in our society a position that's essential, meaning we can't exist as a cohesive society without you doing your job. So let's name a job like I don't know, 911 operator, right? So we need 911 operators, right? We need skilled, quick typing, well-researched 911 operators, right?
Yeah.
Now the question is, how much should that job pay? Because we also have a lot of jobs where it's necessary. We can't exist as a society without it, and yet those jobs pay very little, not enough to really live on.
Right, like fast food workers,
Like a fast food worker.
janitorial services, for example.
Janitorial services and nannies, because we spoke about nannies the other day,
Right.
right? Those are two good examples, right? We all say that we need these services. We all say that we can't live without, except nannies, of course, you can live without, but
we need janitorial services.
But you definitely need janitorial services, right? And to be a janitor, right, is considered to be a low wage, low paying profession, and a lot of times it is a low wage, low paying profession, unless you are like higher up and you're managing people, right? But it's something that's necessary. If all janitors all at the same time said, no, we're not working anymore, pretty much society would crumble to a halt.
Right,
in many different ways.
Our hospitals wouldn't get cleaned, our offices wouldn't get cleaned, our houses wouldn't get cleaned.
I mean, you can clean your own damn house, but all the other things would get clogged with garbage.
Yeah.
So janitorial services are very important, and yet we pay those people very, very little. On the other hand, somebody who does, I don't know, stock market derivatives contributes very little to the actual society, right? So a lot of people will argue, like, oh, well, if you're in a stock market, you're providing liquidity. No, you're not. You're not providing crap. Shut the fuck up. What's actually happening is if you are investing in the stock market, especially if you're investing in an index fund or if you're investing in some of these derivatives, you're not actually doing anything productive at all. You're not creating a productive, you're not engaging in economically productive activity. A very wealthy person who goes out there and invests in companies that they believe are going to be successful, right? So somebody maybe has, let's say, $100 million, they take $10 million, and then they invest it into a company because they really believe that that company is going to become huge, right? And it's usually it's a privately held company, right? So they're doing a job. They're doing an economic job. What they're doing is they're taking on risk. They're taking on risk and putting their reputation and their kind of, well, not necessarily their livelihood, but a stake of their earnings on the line and providing capital for a company to grow that otherwise wouldn't have grown, right? On the other hand, what happens if the same rich person goes out and buys 100 share or whatever number of shares of Apple, same amount, for instance, as they would, like same $10 million that they would have invested in a new company. Instead, they invested in the $10 million worth of Apple shares.
So it's a well-established company.
Well, Apple is a well-established company, but more importantly, does Apple make any uh, money from that transaction?
Not necessarily.
Well, no.
Yeah.
Because they're not selling their stock. They're buying back their stock, but they're not selling any stock, right?
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're buying it from other people who purchased Apple before,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're not contributing to research and development. You're not contributing to new products being created. You're not contributing to advertisement or anything like that. What you're contributing to is profits of another human being when they're selling their stock to you, or losses, it doesn't matter. But you're not actually economically contributing to the whole pie. You're not making the pie grow.
Mm-hmm. And
And
that's problematic
well,
because it doesn't advance our
it
society.
doesn't advance our society in any shape or form. Economics Explained talks about it better than I probably could right now. But it's very important to notice that there's a lot of parasitic that I think um, people kind of throw around these terms like rent seeking. Um, I think incorrectly a little bit in many cases, but in some ways they are rent seeking in these, like a lot of, bankers and lawyers and even doctors to a certain extent are essentially rent seekers because they're not providing necessarily a valuable service to society. What they're providing is a service that's necessary through its own existence.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually kind of an interesting.
So, like dentists,
Well,
to some
dentists are
degree,
fuckers. Uh, s
who have an elaborate scheme to catch you.
yeah, and convince you that you need shit that you don't need,
Yeah.
right? But that's a little different. But I'm talking about, think about it this way. Think about how many lawyers we have in the United States, right?
Unnecessary number of
We
lawyers.
have way too many lawyers.
Yeah.
And I'm a lawyer, by the way, but too many lawyers. Um, on top of that, we have um, all these large law firms, right? That take these lawyers and kind of like combine them into like phalanx and attack vectors and stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then these large corporations have to hire these law firms in order to protect themselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if they don't hire a large law firm, like so if Apple doesn't hire whatever the fuck law firm they hired to protect them against various claims, then another company is going to come in and attack them with another law firm,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then you have to ask yourself a question. Do lawyers exist to protect you, or do lawyers exist because other lawyers exist? It's like Shakespeare said, if you first kill all the lawyers, then will you really need lawyers? And I think he was that quote is often misunderstood, by the way.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that quote?
Well, there's a quote from Shakespeare that says, "First, kill all the lawyers," right? And then people say, "Oh, he was very much anti-lawyer." In fact, he's not. Very likely that the man was a lawyer, as a matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
And what he was saying at that point is, if you want to get rid of civilization, you need to, you kill all the lawyers first, right? Because they're the ones who are actually providing civilization essentially to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a certain amount of lawyers in a society is necessary to maintain civilization because they're the people who are basically essentially interpret code that we all agreed on,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Who write the contracts and the structures for society, the rules by which society should play by.
They write them and then they interpret them as well.
Right, yeah.
Right. So they're kind of like on the computer side, if you I don't know, for people who may be more into programming, it would be kind of like lawyers, the compiler and the interpreter. And those are obviously two different things, but nonetheless, for uh for the human society, for the human computer system, so to speak. But too much of a good thing is a bad thing, right? So we did perfectly fine back in the day with, 5 to 600 people per attorney in the United States. Nowadays, we're like 100, I don't even want to know what it is, like 190, maybe 120 people, maybe 200 people per attorney. In the United States, you can actually look it up. It's a pretty crazy statistic. It's almost as many as real estate agents, and those fuckers breed like flies. So I'm also a real estate agent. Uh, it's
Number of lawyers
in America.
in U.S. 1,338,678.
Yeah, so it's basically one for every 200 people,
Mm-hmm.
one for every 250 people. I mean, children and old people also need lawyers. Anyways, one in I guess the difference is that not all of those lawyers are actually practicing, and a lot of them are employed in the government because the government, for some reason, really loves hiring lawyers. I don't know. Anyways, where was I going with this, by the way?
I'm not sure. Like, you're killing society at some point. You're
Yeah,
quoting
I'm killing
Shakespeare.
society and killing. Oh yeah, read that quote. Look up that quote. First, kill all the lawyers, because it has context that people often don't quote around it. So let's look it up.
Let's kill all the lawyers is a line from William Shakespeare's Henry VI, Part
Uh huh.
2, Act 4, Scene 2.
Uh huh.
The first thing is we do. Hold on. The full quote is, "The first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers." It is among Shakespeare's most famous lines, as well as one of his most controversial. Shakespeare may be making a joke when character Dick the Butcher suggests one of the ways was the band of pretenders to the throne could improve the country is to kill all the lawyers. Dick is a rough character, a killer, as evil as his name implies, like the other henchmen, and this is his rough resolution to his perceived societal problem. The line has been interpreted in different ways. Criticism of how lawyers maintain the privilege of the wealthy and powerful, implicit praise of how lawyers stand in the way of violent mobs, and in criticism of bureaucracy and perversions of the rule of law.
Yeah. So a lot of people take it as he was actually criticizing lawyers, but in fact, um, on a small scale, you need lawyers in order to make your country operate in any kind of reasonable condition.
Oh, that brings me to the second point about achieving world peace.
Uh-huh.
You need rules and orders, well-established rules and orders for people to follow about everything.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Denmark in this regard, or countries like Japan, where people know the rules and they follow the rules.
Yeah, and on the other hand, you have countries like United States in which people know the rules and don't follow them. It's kind of like that joke where in America people throw trash wherever they see or wherever they're standing, and in Japan people walk across the street to throw a trash in a trash can. And even though in Japan trash cans are quite rare, in America trash cans are ubiquitous. So that is a very good point, because after you make everybody equal, after you make everybody not again, you're not making people equal person to person. You're making people equal country or region to region. So that way, um, nobody feels bad about living in a particular region because
Yeah,
their
we all
region
have the
is as
same
wealthy
creature
as
comforts. Yeah.
yeah. So once you get that out of the way, which is an incredibly difficult task in and of itself, right? Then you also need to convince everybody in the world to follow the same rules, to follow the same laws, right? Now you can be very libertarian, you can be very hands-offy about the rules themselves, as to encourage more people to follow them. Basically, I'm figuring like, if you make your rules really strict, that nobody's going to follow them. But if you make your rules and laws kind of like, not necessarily loose,
Like
but
an honor system.
well, not necessarily an honor system either, but they're just not draconian rules and laws, right?
Yeah.
Then people are more likely to follow non-draconian rules and laws, especially if they lead to, better results and people can see that that's the case, right? Like for instance, red lights. Like hardly anybody will argue that running red lights is a good idea, right?
Right.
Well, and even the people who will argue that will not
Quickly find out
quite
that
quickly
it's a
find out
bad
it's a bad
idea.
idea, right? It's like
Yeah.
that old joke about the guy coming the other way.
Right.
So the joke is that two guys are driving and the driver just blows through a red light and his passenger is like, "What the hell? What did you do?" And the driver is like, "Oh, it's fine. I drive just like my brother. My brother is a great driver." So they keep driving, and they go up to another light, and it's a red light, and he just blows through the red light, and he's like, and the passenger's like, "What the fuck? You did it again!" And the driver's like, "It's okay, don't worry about it. My brother told me to drive. I'm driving just like him." Uh,
So what
and
happens next?
and then they pull up to another light, and it's a green light, and the guy just slams on his brakes, and the passenger's like, "What the fuck now?" And the driver is like, "Oh, well, my brother lives around here. He could be coming the other way." So the problem is if everybody acts as an asshole, the whole civilization collapses, right? So you need certain rules, like don't run fucking red lights because that's how we decided to alternate traffic,
Right.
right? Unless there's nobody around you in this case, by all means. But use your best judgment, right? But you also need to kind of be laissez-faire about it, such that um, people can feel, more or less comfortable following your rules. But then you also have to like normalize all the what we consider to be crazy countries in the world, like countries where, like women have to wear burqas. How do you deal, for instance, with Islam and world peace? Like, it almost seems like world peace and Islam are incompatible. I mean, people can say like, oh, well, that's Islamophobic. Oh my God, because Islamic people, by God, they're great people. Oh yeah, there's many of them. There's a lot of them, and most of them are decent people. But the ones who, just like there's a fuck ton of Catholics, and yeah, most of them are decent people. But then there's some of them who want to have crusades.
Right, right, right,
So
right.
it's the same thing here. Yeah, most of Muslims are decent people, but
So you get
some
rid
of them want to kill other people.
right. So you get rid of all religion. And that's
But how do you convince people to get rid of religion?
yeah, that's
And that's
difficult.
and that's
Yeah.
what I always say. This is why I say you can't get rid of religion. You can't get rid of religion.
So you replace it with something equally juicy
Well,
and good.
religion.
Yeah.
You have to replace religion with religion,
Yeah.
right? And I had this.
And then you have to drag people kicking and screaming to your new religion.
Well, then you have to have crusades.
So you have to have crusades. So that's kind of violent. So
So to achieve world peace, you need to create a new religion, convince a bunch of people to follow it, then attack and conquer all the other countries that refuse to follow your religion, convert people to your religion,
you have to industrialize the entire world.
industrialize the entire world, right?
Yeah.
Uh, get so
And teach people how to delay gratification. So because a lot of countries go awry or go corrupt when you get people hooked on instant gratification.
well, that's the religion part of it. So instead of teaching people, that's impossible, right?
Right.
It's literally impossible to teach people to delay gratification. It's not physically, no human is physically capable of actually teaching another human being how to delay gratification. Not possible. But you can trick them into it by through religion.
And planning out things.
Yes, and threats.
Oh God. All of a sudden this sounds like a world
So,
dictatorship.
so all roads towards world peace lead through at least a short but probably prolonged period of dictatorship.
Oh gosh. It sounds like the birth of a new nation. It would be the birth of a new planet society. Because all nations have to go through that, phase of like dictatorship and dragging people kicking and screaming into the new world.
And you will have to drag
era.
people kicking and screaming into. I mean, we were watching a movie a few yesterday, as a matter of fact, Sputnik, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at the beginning of the movie, that general tells that woman that it's not an order, whatever. He's asking her to come with him to investigate this alien creature. And he's like, "Oh, it's not an order, it's a request because I have learned recently or lately that
Intelligent people.
ordering intelligent people around is kind of useless."
Yes.
Which is true. Ordering intelligent people around is mostly useless. You're not going to get any cooperation, and you're just going to get resentment, followed by insubordination, followed by your short murder. So what you should be doing is tricking them, um,
Manipulating
and
them.
manipulating them, not ordering them, right? And that's the thing. Most people in the world can be ordered around. Some people need to be tricked, but all people can be tricked by religion.
Mm.
So,
No, it's not necessarily true because they can just be yes people, and they can go along until something else comes along, and their loyalty will be
as is the case always. That's why
uh,
you have to keep
bought.
keep your death squads sharpened and ready.
Oh, that totally reminds me of the Portlandians that you were listening to, saying that um, the riots in Portland were going to cause people regular people who were feeling threatened by this move to actually join their movement in order to protect themselves.
Well, yeah, but I think on a larger scale, I'm very upset, and now we're moving away from world peace, I guess, to the Portland riots. I'm very upset what's going on there because for two reasons. First, because police brutality is an actual problem. It's an epidemic in America. It's not only against black people, it's against black people, white people, all kinds of people get killed, get assaulted by the police all the time. And that happens for two main reasons. It happens because the police that we hire has horrible training. Horrible training. By that, what I mean is they're horribly
They're
undertrained,
undertrained, yeah.
right? And the second is that the police are improperly incentivized. Because at the end of the day, I always think that everything comes down to incentives. And the police are improperly incentivized in their pay on an economic level. So what does that mean? What does that look like?
That looks like corruption.
Well, on an economic scale, what you have is think about it this way. I mean, like empathize for if you guys, I don't know what kind of listeners we have, but if you guys hate or love the police, doesn't matter. Empathize for a second with a brand new police officer who goes on the force, right? And starts working. This is a guy who maybe is in good shape. Maybe he thought it was a good idea. Maybe he was kind of like one of those hall monitor types of people in high school. Now he joins the police. He gets what? 3 months of training, if he's lucky, right? 3 to 6 months of training. Most of that training, most of it, like more than 90% of it, is either physical training, but it's not like great physical training. It's just doing push-ups and pull-ups and running those stupid courses, right?
Okay.
That's like a tiny sliver of that training. And then the rest of it is just book training in memorizing laws that they have to enforce. That is a really, really fucking idiot. First of all, because all these idiots forget it the minute they leave the academy, right? The minute they pass the test, they carry it to the test and no further. None of them know the actual laws, by the way.
Well, that's the case with everyone who has to take an exam. It's true for doctors, it's true for, lawyers.
So why do we train them that way?
Yeah.
We already employ actual lawyers whose job it is to decide whether or not somebody committed a crime. We call them prosecutors, right?
Right.
Why do we bother trying to teach police officers law? I mean, they need to know what the basics are, what is and isn't against the law, how to collect evidence, and they do show them that. And you're right that like it would take about 3 months to actually show them how to properly bag, tag, and collect evidence. That's literally their job as a police officer, in addition to preventing people from killing each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what we don't teach them is de-escalation of conflicts, establishing rapport with people, negotiating with people who hate your guts, being able to subdue a suspect without hurting them, right? We're not teaching them martial arts. We're not teaching them self-defense tactics that involve common household items, like things that they can find around themselves. These people do not have black belts in any kind of martial art or even purple belts before they join the force, right? Why? Why? They are simply incapable of doing the job with which they are entrusted, even if, and the majority of them are, even if they're a good human being. Even if you're a very good human being,
So what you're saying is that they should all be like Walker, Texas Ranger.
Less shooty, but or less kicky as well. But kind of like, a police officer going into any situation should feel comfortable in the fact that as long as the guy who he is looking to subdue doesn't know any martial arts himself, he should feel comfortable in the fact that he will be able to subdue this person without and put them in handcuffs and put them in his car without harming this person. Regardless of what this person does and says, they should feel comfortable in their own skills to say, no, I will have no problem getting this guy into my car.
But you see, that's way more complicated. That requires way more work than teaching people how to use a gun.
Yeah, of course, but that's what we need to do. Yeah, it requires 2, maybe possibly 3 years of full-time study, full-time martial arts study, full-time negotiations and de-escalation study, simulations, and constant ongoing training after the class. Or, of course, you can train people on the job, right?
And we live in a perfect time to do this because virtual reality is getting good and you can, set up scenarios and even like do scripts for
things like de-escalation, yeah.
Yeah.
But for things like martial arts, like combat.
Well, that's physical. You can go and do that.
Yeah, they can do that.
Live.
They can practice it with each other, basically.
Right.
Well, I mean, they can practice de-escalation with each other too, though. And good departments do teach those things. Good ones.
Yeah, but you can put them like with virtual reality. You can put them in the side of the victim or the person they're talking to, so they can empathize with the people that they're talking to.
Okay, I see what you mean. So that could be a teaching tool, not necessarily just like, yeah, I get it.
So because for a lot of people who lack the empathy gene, it's really hard to put yourself in somebody else's shoe, especially for these law and order types who, want to feel superior to other people, and if all of a sudden you find yourself in their shoes, how would you act? You would learn to ask them why. Why is that person acting that way? I don't know.
No, that makes sense. And that's some of those technologies could be very used, like for instance VR, like you said, could be very useful to establish that. Also, establishing rapport with people can be also done in VR very well because you can see your sight line, and because a lot of it is about sight lines. And you can see the sight lines, and you can see how you modifying your sight line can actually affect people's what is it called? Affect people's perception of yourself, right? So a police officer who looks people straight in they always train them in that dominance strategy, because that's the cheapest, it's like the fast food of strategies, right? And it works on 90% of people in the world, right? But it doesn't work on the uppity people in the world, and doesn't work on me. It doesn't work on people like myself, right? That kind of strategy.
They will just outsmart you and ridicule you, and they're tricksters. They're tricksters.
Well, not
people
even
who want to fuck with the police officers.
Well, either fuck, or their responses to dominance is responses like, no, you don't dominate me, I dominate you.
Right, yeah.
It's going to be that simple. You tell me to do this, I tell you I want to see your superior. You tell me to do that, I take out a gun and shoot you in the face. Right?
Yeah.
So, as a result, it doesn't work on some sizable percentage of the population. That sizable percentage of the population also happens to be more predominantly black. There's a really great book, uh, because it's not also predominantly black. It's black and redneck, which is kind of ironic. There's a really great book. I forget what the name of it is, but it talks about the herding cultures versus the farming cultures, and how in herding versus farming cultures, there is this genetic traits that percolate throughout centuries, where in herding cultures, people tend to be more aggressive, and in farming cultures, people tend to be more passive. And
Why is that?
so it's God. Maybe somebody will leave a comment, tell me what the hell the name of the book was. But it's this guy who studied Appalachian culture, and he compared it to the culture that you can see in the ghettos. So if I remember correctly, it was the ghettos of Chicago, like back in the day, versus like Appalachian culture, and how they're very similar, even though you would think that those people would have nothing in common, right? The traditional racist view is that black people are black, white people are white, a bunch of Appalachian people in the mountains are going to be completely different. So much of hillbillies are going to be completely different than a bunch of, black people in the south side of Chicago, for instance, right? But it turns out that actually on the core level, on the very base level, their cultures interweave quite a bit, because they both come from herding cultures, cattle herding cultures. Did you find the name of the book?
I don't think
No,
so.
that's
That's
certainly
not right.
not. Yeah. Unfortunately, that the book that I'm describing, while not at all prejudiced,
I remember the interview we listened with that guy.
yeah, and it's a very interesting take on that subject. And I wish I fucking knew the
It's
name of it.
Hillbilly Elegy
There you go.
by J.D. Vance.
Yes. And that goes into how different cultures react to different types of authority. And that culture, those cultures, both Appalachian and the Black American culture, they react very negatively towards tough, in your face, do as I tell you, don't ask questions type of authority, right? But at the same time, these types of cultures react very positively to the preaching type of authority, where somebody comes in and says, "Hey guys, let's do it this way. This way is better. It's going to be amazing, and we're all going to be rich, and it's going to be awesome. Do it my way." So you have to establish rapport with those people, right? So as a police officer, you coming up to the scene of the crime, or not necessarily the scene of the crime, because the most type of work that police officers get involved with is not necessarily arresting people. It's more like keeping people out of trouble ahead of time, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a cop approaches a group of people, like for instance, there was a video of a group of actually women, black women, sitting on that porch talking, and they were talking too loud or something like that. And one of their neighbors called
The police.
the police. I don't
Okay.
think it was actually their neighbor who called the police. I forget what the backstory of it is, but somehow the police was there. I think they were called for domestic disturbance next door or something like that, and then they also showed up there. Doesn't matter. But the cop approaches them, and he's like, "You have to leave the porch." And they're like, "No, it's my house. What the fuck are you doing? Right? What are you talking about? I have to leave my
that
porch."
makes sense.
And the cop just tries to dominate them. And he's like, "No, now I'm gonna arrest you. Now you're gonna go into the squad car because you dared to question my authority, right?" And then they chase around and blah blah blah, and the guy got fired at the end. The cop. I don't remember exactly what happened in that case, but the point is that he approached it all wrong. He could have approached it by coming in there and saying, "Hey guys, what are you doing? Oh, you having tea? Oh, that's awesome. Hey, your neighbor down the street? He's sleeping. He has to work at night. Do you think you can keep it down so I don't have to come back here?" Like that dissolves the situation. Now, they may say no. They may say fuck off, right? But I think most decent people, and I think most people are decent, will be like, oh yeah, shit, fuck. Okay, never mind. We'll keep it down. Have a good day, right? Like
Yeah.
that gets resolved. But when you roll up and you say there, you need to get off the porch. Like you didn't even tell them why. You didn't establish any kind of friendliness with them. Why would these people treat you nicely if you treat them like that? Right? But see, the thing is, it's not that the cops are bastards. I mean, some of them are bastards, but it's not that all of them are bastards. This
And
is what
some
they're
of them,
trained.
and some of them will actually go and ask the nice way. By
Yeah,
the way.
but those are the good ones.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that, they're cops in the police force that make it through 30 years of service and never take out their gun out of their holster.
Yeah.
Why is that? Are they just lazy? Are they not shooting people often enough? No, they know how to dissolve situations, how to take a tense situation and kind of, make a little joke, explain to people why this is happening, and tell them that everything's going to be okay as long as they follow what you're telling them. But you're telling them, that, hey, I'm not ordering you around here. I'm just trying to explain to you why I'm here and why I'm not going to leave here unless we fix this problem. How else can you propose to fix it? You guys like to talking loud? Maybe you can do it inside. Can we do that? Like you can have a conversation with people, right?
Right. Yeah.
But instead, I mean, you saw that you saw that it's like these people who train. They train them. It's like that security guard that we had a standoff, and you see that's exactly kind of personality. Where I had a friend who was hosting a party at their pool in their condo complex, and it's right around midnight. I'm sorry, it was either 10 o'clock or midnight. I don't remember. Whatever the time it was, that's where they closed down the pool. So it's about 10 minutes before the closure of the pool, and the security guard, who happens to be black actually, comes over, takes out his taser, starts clicking his taser around the fucking pool. Now I know he's not going to jump into the pool, but what if he drops it, right? While it's actually on. And what if somebody in the pool has a pacemaker, right? But he starts clicking his little taser, telling people, "You have to get out. You have to get out now. You're leaving now. Everybody's leaving now. If you don't leave now, I'm going to tase you." He actually says that. And my reaction wasn't, "Oh, I'm afraid of this guy." I mean, my reaction was, "No, I'm going to stand in front of you now. Tase me, you fucking asshole. Go ahead."
Right.
That was my reaction. And my reaction was like, if he just said, "Hey guys, I know it's 10 minutes before it's time to get out, but you know how it is. We got to get everybody out. We have to do a sweep. We have to make sure everything is clean. We have to close it down. Just give me a favor. Can we just start packing now? I know you guys can get out of here at 10, but can you just start packing now so we can be orderly and just get out of here at 10 so I can close down and go home," right? Had he said that, I think everybody, including myself, would have complied. Would have said, "Sure, that makes sense. Okay. No problem. We'll help you out," right? But instead, he's trying to be a big guy. He's trying to be a tough guy. And when you try to be a tough guy, necessarily somebody else is going to be like, "Oh, yeah, you think you're tough? Let's play."
Right. Yeah.
And that's the thing. So we have to train cops how to do that. We have to train cops how to be understanding, right? But that takes money. So you don't get there by fucking defunding the goddamn police. Yeah, we should get rid of the police unions, or at least really neuter them to the point where they can't do what they're doing now, protect shitty cops and really throw under the bus the good ones. But we have to maintain law and order, right? And then law and order is kind of a shitty idea, because whenever people say law and order, what they mean is like, "Oh, I want all the poor people out of my neighborhood," right? That's primarily what people say when they say law and order, right? But a lot of the times, the people who need law and order the most are the actual poor people, right? I mean, imagine if you live in the south side of Chicago, and imagine if you're a decent and honest person. If you just want to go to school, or you just want to go to work, you want to come back from your school, if you want to work, you want to buy some groceries, you want to go home, you want to have some fun, watch telly, go to sleep, and not have to worry about the fact that some crackhead is going to break into your house in the middle of the night and try to steal your television. or that there'll be people waiting for you outside your house to rob you as you were leaving for work, right?
Mhm.
Or that your car has been broken in at night and like the fucking engine was stolen out of it or something,
Mhm.
right? Which does happen. Um, so law and order is very valuable, but it's one of those valuable commodities that you don't miss until you miss it, type of thing, right? So people say, "Oh, law and order, yeah, sure, we don't need cops." No, 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 we don't need cops. No, no, no law and order. Fuck that shit. We'll just police ourselves, right? Just like in that Chaz, whatever the fuck that thing was in Seattle, right? And the next thing you know, people start being killed, right? Because you realize, oh yeah, that's right. It's not that cops are evil. It's just people are evil sometimes, and then they suck at actually enforcing laws. Cops just happen to be the people who have that job, but if we give that job to another person, they'll suck at it too, unless they have proper training, unless they have the proper personality, and unless they have experience doing that kind of thing, right? Because you also have to have experience. So, no, okay. Well, do you want to finish it up because we started with
World peace,
world peace and we ended up with
Law and
the
Order, and
law and order
how
and cops
and
and
Hillbilly Elegy, which is
yeah,
actually a good book. I mean a book that interests me.
it's a book that I've read in passing because somebody recommended it to me, but I didn't pay particularly close attention to it. We should listen to it again,
Yeah.
and maybe we'll talk about it as a future podcast because I think it does explain a lot of things about uh, black people. Though, if you really want to see and understand black people more so than you understand them now, and if you are not one of them, and if you are and you insulted by this, fuck off. Watch that. What is that movie? Um, the Dynamite movie that we watched.
Where's Dynamite?
Oh, there you go. Watch that movie. Watch Dynamite. Like, and then realize that while it's a constant, non-stop 1970s black American stereotype, those stereotypes are there for a reason, and it was beloved. It was beloved by black people at that time. I mean, I'm assuming now too, which means that it really does represent their culture. It really does represent their culture. Maybe not, we should. It's not what we should think about them, and that's like the end of it. It's more like, when you see the traditional Eskimo dance, and the traditional Eskimo dance, like, do we assume that these Eskimos, that's all they fucking do? Do we assume that they're not normal human beings that also do other things, right? So it's the same thing with black people, but you should see it as a performance art to understand their culture.
I'm just actual double checking the movie. Uh, let's see what Black Dynamite. It's a
Yeah.
2009 comedy action movie.
Well, Black Dynamite, the 2009 one, is
based on the.
yeah, it's based on a movie that was made in the 70s or so.
Am I really? Yeah, yeah, this is it.
Yeah. So you can watch either, watch the original or watch the remake.
Black Dynamite.
Again, the important thing to note is it's not, how can I say it? It's not representative of all black people, but it shows you a glimpse into the reality of their life that will make you understand a little bit more about their humor, about how they interact with each other, how they treat each other, which I think is important. It's an important study in our mutual kind of um, society trying to understand each other. It's a way to build empathy, I believe.
Interesting. The book that I would keep coming across is White Fragility
Oh, fuck that bullshit.
by Robin DiAngelo.
Yeah,
Like that,
if you wanna completely misunderstand black people, read that book.
which is about why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. Well, the majority of America is still white, so I guess
Well, 55% or
it
so.
makes
It's
sense.
not like it's
It
90.
makes sense to train white people on understanding black people than for black people to understand white people.
No, it understands. It certainly makes sense both. For black people, if you're a bunch of black people and you want to understand white people, what would be a good movie to understand white people?
Meet the parents, meet the fuckers.
Well, yeah, suburban. If you want to understand suburbanites, watch that. Yeah. If you want to understand like the poor white people, watch like Train Spotting or something like that. I don't know. I don't know. The problem is that there is no such thing as white really in America anymore because there was never white. It was always a huge conglomeration of Irish, Italian, Spanish, German, Russian, Ukrainian, Mongolian,
Chinese.
no, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say Mongolian, but I kind of was in that region. But like all the Caucasian people, basically, right, coming together, these Caucasian people have nothing in common with each other,
And
really.
they battled it out.
And they used to fight like hell, yeah. The Italians weren't even considered to be white until recently, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if they're still considered to be white in some KKK circles, but the idea is that all these people eventually melted together into like this white identity, and now we are calling them all white. Well, like they're not really that. Just like a lot of black. I mean, there's black people who are American, African American black. And I don't really like that terminology because it's like you're black and you're in America. You're full human. You don't need like this little hyphenation to your name or to your, I don't know, race. But there is also African people from like Nigeria and stuff like that. When they come over to the United States, they have very different cultures.
Yep.
They have very different cultures, right?
But that
So
could be a bias, like the sort of people that would leave their country and live in America would be the more sophisticated
yeah, there is a
variety.
selection bias, but if you take an average American and you transport them to Nigeria or you transport them to well any of the African countries really, they're not going to be particularly at home. Anyways, let's kill the podcast for now, and we'll come back to this, and maybe we'll even read that White Fragility book, and then I can spew hatred against it for an hour and a half.
Sounds good.
All right, bye everyone.
Bye.